Welcome to the Sage Women podcast, hosted by Melanie White and Dr. Nick Engera. We have real conversations with real women, health professionals, and coaches who share stories about perimenopause, menopause, and a range of women's health issues. Please subscribe so you get the latest updates every fortnight.
Really pleased to have you on the podcast, Amanda. Thank you so much for being here today.
Great. Thanks for having me, Mel. It's nice to get together in this format and, see what comes up in our discussion.
As you know, I like to let my guests introduce themselves. So can you give us a little bit of background about you and what you do?
Yeah. Well, my name's Amanda Kube and I live in Victoria, and I have a health and wellness business with coaching and looking after women in menopause. And I'm doing that here in my little country area and loving that, working with clients and building, I guess, just a whole lot of elements of awareness raising around menopause, and really loving working in that space. So that's what I'm doing. I've got an education background. I've been a teacher for over 25 years before launching into my health and wellness business. And that was mostly in outback Queensland, working with School of the Air mostly. And so I've now moved into, when we returned to Victoria, moved into creating my own health and wellness business, predominantly at the start around massage, and still with education in that element as well. And in the last 2 or 3 years, I've taken up and the coaching and become a certified health and wellness coach. And that's where my sort of energies are going, especially in the menopause space. Yeah.
Great background. And I love that you've been a champion in the outback or in the rural regional space. So a few health practitioners around that really know how to support people with confusing, challenging and confronting health conditions and issues.
Yeah, it raises interesting things. It's ironic, because in some ways Mount Isa, being a large town, even though it's very remote, had quite a good health care network and servicing around it and support. Victoria, Western Victoria, out in the middle of sort of what we call the outback of Victoria, very different scenario. So it's ironic sometimes you can come to a state that you think of as very populated and would be well serviced, not necessarily the case in terms of all that. So it's interesting where those gaps sometimes land.
And how did you, and pardon the pun, transition into menopause coaching?
Yeah, it came out of two elements, really. The first was COVID and being a remedial massage therapist and suddenly having no work, couldn't do any of my work. I was like thinking, what am I going to do? How am I going to protect and add value to what I offer in the wellness space when there may be some future where massage isn't possible? So I started looking at some options and eventually went with the health and wellness coaching, which was a fabulous course. And as that process got going and I could see that there was a lot of bringing together of my skills and my backgrounds, my own experience of menopause and perimenopause particularly started to really go around in my mind and get me thinking, actually, this could be an area that I could offer something, because my desire, I guess, was to, if I could help one woman not have the experience I had, it's sort of like a help them not have something, it would be a great thing to help a woman navigate the space, particularly of perimenopause, and get support and know where they could go for further help and assistance. What an amazing thing that would be, particularly around anxiety in menopause, which was very crippling for me for a number of years.
Right, so really drawing together your past skills and experience and including your own personal experience, realizing that how horrible it can be and how many other women might need support.
That's right. I felt like it was a space that wasn't getting attention in a whole lot of areas. And I just felt like there was an opportunity here to bring the coaching approach to menopause as a way of supporting a woman, but not taking power or control away, because everyone's experience is so very different in menopause. And what I love about the idea is of working with women in menopause is you are creating space for the person to find what they need. And that to me is one of the most fantastic things about working in the coaching space, but in the menopause space, is helping a woman find what is already within her to work through this, but just helping to clear away some of the clutter and the difficulties of seeing clearly. Yeah.
It's a really nice way that you've described that. And it's definitely, you reach that point where you don't know who you are anymore. All of this stuff that you've had in your life, all of the things that have accumulated, you mentioned clutter, and a lot of that is clutter. And I think you reach this point where you have less space and energy and tolerance. And suddenly you start to see the things that you've been putting up with and that no longer serve you, and you might have also lost a bit of your identity, and
yes,
you've been shifted into this new space. It's really hard to look at that stuff and figure out what to do.
Yeah, I think there is that real self-doubt is very prevalent, I think, in that stage where you're a competent person who's running jobs, running a family, doing all sorts of things in the community space as well, and suddenly you feel like you don't even know who you are anymore. And that's very hard on the self-confidence. And I think what I find, when I'm working with women, is that sometimes it's the symptoms of menopause might be the start point, but very quickly we move on from that to deeper issues of self-worth, confidence, trusting myself, connecting to my intuition, become where the bigger discussion and growth seems to come from.
And it sounds a bit like mental health, if you could put it under a banner.
Yeah, I feel like it's a lovely space to be a bit of a gatekeeper with a woman, to help her tap into herself, find her own way through it, but also recognize that if there is some deeper underlying issues going on, you can have some sort of a referral pathway to enable her to seek professional help if that's needed. But there's this lovely space that coaching sits in that can offer so much, in that early stage. Yeah.
And can you talk to us a little bit about anxiety, Amanda, in menopause?
Yeah. I think for me, it was such a revelation to discover that it was a part of menopause, because going through perimenopause for me, I'm now 57, so it was about 10 years ago I started going through perimenopause, was getting the hot flushes and thought that was sort of the main thing, didn't know much more really. But anxiety really started to crank up at that time. And it was put down to a few things. And, I'd had palpitations as well, which were quite significant. And so those other elements, like the palpitations, they were sort of dealt with from a GP point of view very thoroughly, and that was all fine, nothing there. But menopause, anxiety in menopause was not raised or discussed. So I had no idea that it was linked. So for me, it was the idea that just normal everyday life was suddenly freaking me out completely. And I can remember driving one day. I was going to a massage. Can you believe it? Of all things, wonderful thing. I was driving to a massage, absolutely wound up just to get to this appointment on time, and just totally freaked out about getting to this appointment and going there. And I wasn't late. Nothing was wrong. And I'm thinking something weird is happening here if I'm driving to my massage and I'm absolutely feeling like I'm about to walk over a tightrope over the Grand Canyon. It was just this total fear.
Wow.
And so because I wasn't seeing or hearing anything about what that was in the world around me, I felt like there was something wrong with me. There was something really wrong here. So for me, what that led to is a lot of control, trying to control everything because of this fear that was coming in everything. So I'd be doing a whole lot of exercise because that's supposed to help. So I'd be doing a lot of eating, controlling healthy eating, but getting really stressed about my food choices. And so these sorts of escalating things were just building and building. And I feel like for me, when I look back at that time, if that could have been identified then as linked to menopause, that anxiety, and some strategies to help work with that, I feel like some really unhelpful patterns of thinking could have been arrested a bit earlier. And that, I think, is for me what took many years to stabilize and move through, because I had really entrenched some unhelpful thinking patterns around my anxiety and what it meant about me as a person. So that involved counseling and herbal remedies and a lot of support in a whole lot of different areas through my partner and friends, meditation, to really get through that process. There's a long story there.
No, it's really important to hear that you had such a tough time for a long time because you didn't have that link. You didn't know what caused it, and you were seeing it as part of who you were, as part of your identity almost, instead of the cause being more likely a hormonal imbalance, and then how that showed up for you every day. It's really important that people hear that, because I think we go through these things and think, is this normal? Am I the only one going through this? What can I do? Who do I talk to? Am I going mad?
Yes.
All of those things that create the self-doubt that you talked about earlier.
Yep. And it was interesting, once I did find that connection, it was through reading a book by Dr. Nicola Gates, The Good Menopause, I think. I can't remember quite what it's called. A lot of really good evidence-based stuff in there. She was the one who really highlighted the anxiety element of menopause. And it was like, oh my goodness. It didn't mean suddenly it switched off and I was done, because these habits had got in place and they were churning along. They're taking a lot of unraveling. But I did make a big effort then of starting to talk to other women and about it, and about, actually, for me, it's anxiety. And, so many people would say, oh, I can't believe you just said that. I don't know what's going on with me. And they would almost literally grab my arm and say, what is happening? I can't understand this. I'm a capable professional and I've, lost my shit, basically. So that, I think, really also ticked away in the back of my mind about, boy, here's an area that where women are really not being well supported and carrying this load. So that also led into why I might target working with women in menopause who are experiencing anxiety, just from what I was hearing and experiencing myself.
It sounds like you really lifted the lid on an unmet need, and you talked about the habits that you were doing that were perpetuating anxiety. And I'm imagining now, in the work that you're doing, you're helping people develop new habits, and everybody's different, of course, but what types of things can people do for themselves in terms of their daily, weekly, monthly habits that might help them to understand or manage anxiety a bit better?
Yeah, I think one of the big ones is to actually recognize that you can come to your breath as a really fabulous way to just settle in the moment. And I think for me, my breath as an anchor has been a huge thing, and particularly focusing on the out breath. I think it's also to do with that idea that I mentioned before about creating space. And I think it's just taking stock for a moment when things are escalating and get out of your head and into your body. And I think there is literally this sort of disconnect that happens where when you're in this sort of state where you are just all in your head. So mindfulness practices in particular have been a really great anchor for me to just focus on the breath. And it's been the most helpful to learn to focus on the out breath, because when we're in this fight or flight state, we're shallow breathing and we're breathing in the upper chest and we're often holding our breath. That amazed me when I realized how much I was holding my breath. And I hadn't ever realized it was going on for a long time. And I read a lot of places recently, it's been jumping out in a lot of my reading, that when you hold your breath, you can't feel. And that to me is such a powerful statement. So when we hold our breath, we stop ourselves from feeling. So breathing and just connecting to the breath and just stopping, coming back down into that. I often put a hand on my chest. You can see me doing it as I'm talking, because it's so powerful. And just focus a really simple way of 3 counts in, 6 counts out. And I count it. And I do cycles. And I do it anywhere and everywhere just to bring that. And I've read about the idea that it just helps to drop your cortisol levels really quickly. And I hold on to that because it sounds really nice and sciencey, and just gives you that sense of, right, this is what I'm going to do.
Yeah.
But to me, it gives me a wonderful way of just, almost literally coming out of my head and down into my body and grounding, I guess. Yeah. And taking a moment to ascertain that impending feeling of doom, nothing is going to happen. And everything about what you're thinking and feeling at the time tells you otherwise. But so the breath, anyway, that's really valuable for me. I think another one that's really helped me is to, and this is through counselling, but is to remember that our feelings, our emotions are guides for us. And they actually have a purpose, even the uncomfortable ones. And they're trying to tell us something. And maybe if we can just pause and listen, we might be able to hear what might want to happen next. So I think it sounds funny, but everyone who has anxiety knows it. We are afraid of the fear. So almost trying to make friends with the fear has been a very helpful thing for me. Yeah. I haven't been able to come to that. That's on my own. That's and most things you don't come to on your own, even though you think you do. Counselling has been very helpful for some of that deeper understanding of what has driven some of my unhelpful patterns of thinking.
And I guess there are also other things you can do too. I mean, I know I've woken up a few times having an anxiety attack or a panic attack in the middle of the night, totally unexpected. And then I've looked at stimulants and sugar and those sorts of things in my diet. Can you speak to some of those other things that people can do to manage anxiety?
I think there are two elements. There's the anxiety where the source is mental, and then when it's physical. So for some people, that means exercise is really, really great. If their anxiety is more physically driven, then making sure you include a simple walk for half an hour every day, doing some mindfulness practice like yoga. I find that absolutely amazing. So doing a few simple yoga postures, particularly before bed. And yeah, reducing alcohol, I think, is a really big one for keeping anxiety levels down. What happens if it's more driven by mental processing? If you put too many physical controls in place, they become another source of anxiety. I'm not exercising enough. Now, I've done 2 walks today, actually, but I'm really anxious. Maybe I better do 3. And so there's that. Once I worked out mine was mental. Then that's where using things more like yoga, meditation, mindfulness practices of just becoming present. So just accepting this moment for how it is and coming into the senses, really helpful. And when I was very agitated, I found sometimes just the really practical thing of going, okay, what's 5 things I can see? What's 3 things I can hear? And just take yourself out of your head there and into what reality is around you. So it depends on the type of anxiety you have, what works best for you. But look, generally a combo of all those things are fabulous for most people that are in that state of, I don't know how to get out of my head and how to get down from this absolute racket that's going on in my brain.
That's some really good points, and thanks for clarifying the difference between the source of the anxiety. I bet a lot of people don't know that, and it's an important distinction.
It helps, I think, to then, once you work out what is where your anxiety is sort of directed from, that there are some things that might tailor better for you than others. Yeah. And that's up to everyone to go looking for that, but there's lots out there to support that. Yeah.
Now, Amanda, you haven't mentioned massage. Is massage great?
Yeah, look, it is actually an incredible element to improving well-being, and there's a lot of studies and research out there to support just really the capacity of massage to drop the sympathetic nervous system activation and bring up the parasympathetic and allow that rest and digest to happen. So yeah, massage is fabulous. You can obviously go for treatments. People often underestimate the importance of relaxation massage, actually. And as a therapist, I'm often promoting the restorative and nurturing elements of relaxation massage to support mental health and anxiety and depression in particular. So going and getting a regular massage is a wonderful thing, but often we forget we can do it for ourselves too. And I think that's a part of what I still do now with coaching, even when I'm working in a Zoom context or some online version, is just remind people that they can care for themselves with self-massage, even if it's just laying on of hands on the belly and the chest and breathing into that, and actually that sense of giving yourself an embrace and accepting yourself, or even bringing a hand, say you've got tightness in your neck and shoulders, which we tend to do as we get anxious, we pull up, just resting a hand on an area that's tight and tense and letting that process happen. So there's also great self-massage you can do, as well as building professional massage into your health and well-being. Yeah.
Funnily enough, you mentioned that hands-on, and I thought, gee, I do that at night. If I wake up and I've got a racing mind, I can't sleep, I naturally put a hand on my chest and on my belly. And I fall asleep that way.
Yeah.
Just intuitively doing it.
Yes, without even knowing that it is incredibly good for you. And yeah, there's a lot, I think, in that we can really tap into is our deep knowing within ourselves of what to do in a situation and doing it more.
Wow, man, there's some amazing insights there. And I really appreciate you talking through lots of different ways to get help if you're struggling with anxiety and menopause and perimenopause.
Yeah.
It sounds like there's a lot of different options, and really everyone's going to be different. And I like the idea of building a support team around you, and there are people that can help you with different areas. And you've kind of spoken to that a bit today. But what about people in rural and remote areas that don't have access to services or have a limited number of services? How can they get support?
It's a really challenging area because people who are trying to connect with all those elements that could improve their situation, there's so much reduction in what's available. I think one of the things is to look carefully at the options to start with finding a good GP. That is challenging in the rural and remote spaces, but it's not insurmountable. Finding someone who is listening to you is a key thing. With the advent of telehealth now, there's some really good options to support people. And a lot of my time with my anxiety being at a very high level, I was in Western Victoria and no services closer than an hour away, and most of them further. I was able to do a lot on telehealth, and nearly all of my counselling was telehealth, and it was fantastic. And I still work with a counsellor through telehealth, and it's amazing what we can do, the rapport we can build. So that has opened up since COVID really great opportunities for reaching out and finding some great options for counselling and even online GP consults, and being ready to try someone else if you don't feel that the person's hearing you properly, but which is hard because then you've got to tell your story again.
Yeah.
But it's worth it if you can find someone who is listening to you properly and taking what you're saying seriously and being proactive at helping you to find some options. So that would be, and even my yoga. I did most of my yoga through COVID, like everyone did, on Zoom. And so it still supported me incredibly well and gave me links to people. Probably another thing that I reckon in rural and remote areas is being up for talking to your friends and to your loved ones about it, because they're going through it with you, whether you notice it or not. So I think it involves risk, of course, and vulnerability, but being ready to find a person you know has your back and you can trust to share this experience with. My own experience of that is I've had some incredible friends who have supported me through my really difficult times of anxiety and no sleep for weeks on end. Having those key people that were really supporting me beautifully, and I knew I could call them anytime, day or night, and it made a huge difference to me to have those. So I'd be encouraging people to be drawing on the people that you have already in your world as well, and finding a trusted friend or loved one to help you, support you.
Yeah, it makes sense, and it can be hard to open up, but it's probably something of a relief too to be able to talk about it.
I think so. And oftentimes people then will say, they'll share something of themselves, and you think, oh gosh, I had no idea you were going through that, or that was such a big thing for you in your life. And that just helps you get out of your own head too. and you've got someone else being honest with you, and it builds connection, of course, and that's also incredibly good for us and our mental health.
Such a great point. And I mean, I live in a regional area as well, and I know that although I don't have a lot of close friends here, I do have some wonderful places to go, and one of them is a craft group, and there's women of kind of 40 to 70 in that group. It's quite diverse. And even if you don't know people in the group very well, it's a very frank and open discussion. It's a bit like the modern version of the CWA in a way. And we can have conversations around all sorts of things. So you never know where that conversation is going to come from, perhaps.
That's a really good point, because if you've got that openness to sharing, and sometimes with people you don't know as well, it can be a little bit easier. If you feel like you can just sort of lob something into the discussion and the group isn't going to suddenly descend on it and tear it apart and all that, you can, almost test out what it's like to say something as a practice run, even if you don't know the people that well.
Yeah.
So you're right. It is important to be open to some options for how you open yourself up, and where and how.
Been great chatting with you today, Amanda. Where can people find out more about you if they'd like to get in touch and inquire about coaching around anxiety in menopause and perimenopause?
Yeah, I've got some courses coming up in the menopause space, so that'd be lovely to hear from people. Probably my website's the best place to get a bit of an overview on me, and that's wellnesswithamanda.au. And then you can also email me to find out more about things, which is connect@wellnesswithamanda.au. So
that's just a .au at the end, no .com.
Yeah, okay. It's some new way that yes, that's my the way it works for me. Yep.
Excellent. We will put those links in the show notes.
Thank you.
Thanks for your time and for being here on the podcast today. I really appreciate it.
It's a pleasure. Thanks, Melanie. It was really good.